saintly persons, the inhabitants of Pitraloka and Bhutaloka, case, however, when all the demigods were happy because of why? It may be suggested that Indra was unhappy because he knew that he had killed a great devotee in Pramana. Vritrasura outwardly appeared to be a demon, but inwardly he was a great devotee and therefore a great Brahmana. Herein it is clearly indicated that a person who is not at all demoniac, such as Prahlad Maharaj and Bali Maharaj, may outwardly be a demon or be born in a family of demons. Therefore, in terms of real culture, one should not be considered a demigod or demon simply according to birth. In his dealings while fighting with Indra, Vritrasura proved himself a great devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Furthermore, as soon as he finished fighting with Indra and was apparently killed, Vritrasura was transferred to Vaikuntha Loka to become an associate of Sankarsana. Indra knew this, and therefore he was morose at having killed such a demon who was actually a Vaishnava or a Brahmana. A Vaishnava is already a Brahmana, although a Brahmana may not be a Vaishnava. The Padma Purana says, Shatkarma nipuno vipro mantra tantra visharadaha avaishnavo gururna syad Vaishnava shrapacho guru. One may be a Brahmana in terms of his culture and family, and may be expert in Vedic knowledge, mantra, tantra, visharada. But if he is not a Vaishnava, he cannot be a guru. This means that an expert Brahmana may not be a Vaishnava, but a Vaishnava is already a Brahmana. A millionaire may very easily possess hundreds and thousands of dollars, but a person with hundreds and thousands of dollars is not necessarily a millionaire. Vritrasura was a perfect Vaishnava, and therefore he was also a Brahmana. 4. Sri Shukadeva Goswami answered, when all the great sages and demigods were disturbed by the extraordinary power of Vritrasura, they had assembled to ask Indra to kill him. Indra, however, being afraid of killing a Brahmana, declined their request. I'm going to read number 4 again. Sri Shukadeva Goswami answered, when all the great sages and demigods were disturbed by the extraordinary power of Vritrasura, they had assembled to ask Indra to kill him. Indra, however, being afraid of killing a Brahmin, declined their request. Good. 5. King Indra replied, when I killed Vishvarupa, I received extensive sinful reactions, but I was favored by the woman, land, trees, and water, and therefore I was able to divide the sin among them. But now, if I kill Vritrasura, another Brahmana, how shall I free myself from the sinful reactions? Yes, Maharaj.
Well, I just thought that was interesting how here I was favored by is here in this verse. Because the other day we were wondering how those things could be distributed, you know? But here it's saying that there's a mutual. They're favored Indra, because they had big respect for Indra, because he's the control of heaven. That answers the question.
There you have it.
Text 6. Sri Shukadeva Goswami said, hearing this, the great sages replied to King Indra, O King of Heaven, all good fortune unto you. Do not fear. We shall perform an Ashwamedha sacrifice to release you from any sin you may accrue by killing the Brahmana. 7. The rishis continued, O King Indra, by performing an Ashwamedha sacrifice and thereby pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Supersoul, Lord Narayana, the Supreme Controller, one can be relieved even of the sinful reactions for killing the entire world, not to speak of killing a demon like Vritrasura. 8 and 9. One who has killed a Brahmana, one who has killed a cow, or one who has killed his father, mother, or spiritual master, can be immediately freed from all sinful reactions simply by chanting the holy name of Lord Narayana. Other sinful persons, such as dog-eaters and chandalas, who are less than Shudras, can also be freed in this way. But you are a devotee, and we shall help you by performing the great horse sacrifice. If you please Lord Narayana in that way, why should you be afraid? You will be freed, even if you kill the entire universe, including the Brahmanas, not to speak of killing a disturbing demon like Vritrasura. Purport. It is said in the Brihad Vishnu Purana, Namno yajavati shakti papa nirharane harehe tavat kartum senok shakti patakam pataki naraha. Also in the Prema Vibharta by Jagadananda Pandit, it is said, Eka Krishna Name Papira Yatta Papa Chaya Bhujan Vase Papi Karite Naraya. This means that by once chanting the holy name of the Lord, one can be freed from the reactions of more sins that he can even imagine performing. The holy name is so spiritually potent that simply by chanting the holy name, one can be freed from the reactions to all sinful activities. What then is to be said of those who chant the holy name regularly or worship the deity regularly? For such purified devotees, freedom from sinful reaction is certainly assured. This does not mean, however, that one should intentionally commit sinful acts and think himself free from the reactions because he is chanting the holy name. Such a mentality is a most abominable offense at the lotus feet of the holy name. Namno balad yasahi papa buddhi. The Lord's holy name certainly has the potency to neutralize all sinful activities, but if one repeatedly and intentionally commits sins while chanting the holy name, he is most condemned. These verses name the performers of various sinful deeds. In the Manu Samhita, the following names are given. A son begotten by a Brahmana and born from the womb of a Shudra mother is called a Parashava or Nishada, a hunter accustomed to stealing. A son begotten by a Nishada in the womb of a Shudra woman is called a Bukasa. A child begotten by a Kshatriya in the womb of the daughter of a Shudra is called an Ugra. A child begotten by a Shudra in the womb of the daughter of a Kshatriya is called a Chata. A child begotten by a Kshatriya in the womb of a lower class woman is called a Shwada, or dog-eater. All such offspring are considered extremely sinful, but the holy name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is so strong that all of them can be purified simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. The Hare Krishna movement offers everyone a chance to be purified, regardless of birth or family. as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.4.18, Kiratuhunandra Pulinda Palkasha Abhira Shumba Yavanakasadeyaha Yen Ye Champapa Yadapachaya Yacha Shudyanti Tasmai Prabhavishnave Namaha. Kiratas, Hunas, Andhras, Pulindas, Pulkashas, Abhiras, Shumbas, Yavanas, members of the Kasa races, and even others addicted to sinful acts can be purified by taking shelter of devotees of the Lord, for He is the supreme power. I beg to offer my respectful obeisances unto Him. Even such sinful persons can certainly all be purified if they chant the holy name of the Lord under the direction of a pure devotee. Herein the sages encourage King Indra to kill Vritrasura, even at the risk of Brahmahatya, the killing of a Brahmana, and they guarantee to release him from sinful reactions by performing an Ashwamedha Yajna. Such purposeful devised atonement, however, cannot relieve the performer of sinful acts. This will be seen from the following verse, text 10. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, encouraged by the words of the sages, Indra killed Vritrasura, and when he was killed, the sinful reaction for killing a Brahmana, Brahmahatya, certainly took shelter of Indra. Purport. After killing Vritrasura, Indra could not surpass the Brahmahatya, the sinful reactions for killing a Brahmana. Formerly he had killed one Brahmana, Vishwarupa, out of circumstantial anger, but this time, following the advice of the sages, he killed another Brahmana purposely. Therefore the sinful reaction was greater than before. Indra could not be relieved from the reaction simply by performing sacrifices for atonement. He had to undergo a severe series of sinful reactions, and when he was freed by such suffering, the Brahmanas allowed him to perform the horse sacrifice. The planned execution of sinful deeds on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord or undergoing prayaschita, atonement, cannot give relief to anyone, even to Indra or Nahusha. Nahusha was officiating for Indra, while Indra, absent from heaven, was going here and there to gain release from his sinful reactions.
Following the advice of the demigods, Indra killed Vritrasura, and he suffered because of this sinful killing. Although the other demigods were happy, he could not derive happiness from the killing of Vritrasura. Indra's other good qualities, such as tolerance and opulence, could not help him in his grief. Purport: one cannot be happy by committing sinful acts, even if one is endowed with material opulence. Indra found this to be true. People began to blaspheme him, saying, "This person has killed a Brahmana for the sake of enjoying heavenly material happiness." Therefore, in spite of being king of heaven and enjoying material opulence, Indra was always unhappy because of the accusations of the. Therefore, in spite of being king of heaven and enjoying material opulence, Indra was always unhappy because of the accusations of the populace. Text numbers 12 and 13. Indra saw a personified sinful reaction chasing him, appearing like a Chandala woman, a woman of the lowest class. She seemed very old, and all the limbs of her body trembled. Because she was afflicted with tuberculosis, her body and garments were covered with blood. Breathing an unbearable fishy odor that polluted the entire street, she called to Indra, Wait! Here, let's get the real thing. Wait! Very good. Purport: when a person is afflicted with tuberculosis, he often vomits blood, which makes his garments bloody. O king, Indra first fled to the sky, but there he also saw the woman of personified sin chasing him. This witch followed him wherever he went, At last he very quickly went to the northeast and entered the Manasa Sarovara lake. 15. Always thinking of how he could be relieved from the sinful reactions for killing a Brahmana, King Indra, invisible to everyone, lived in the lake for 1,000 years in the subtle fibers of the stem of a lotus. The fire god used to bring him his share of all yagyas, but because the fire god was afraid to enter the water, Indra was practically starving.
Shows that Indra is no ordinary person. Text 16. As long as King Indra lived in the water, wrapped in the stem of a lotus, Nahusha was equipped with the ability to rule the heavenly kingdom due to his knowledge, austerity, and mystic power. Nahusha, however, blinded and maddened by power and opulence, made undesirable proposals to Indra's wife with a desire to enjoy her. Thus Nahusha was cursed by a Brahmana and later became a snake. Hey, I don't know if going to the heavenly planet is such a good idea. I mean, you turned into a snake, a lizard, a crocodile, Jeez. I mean, really. Text 17. Indra's sins were diminished by the influence of Rudra, the demigod of all directions. Because Indra was protected by the goddess of fortune, Lord Vishnu's wife, who resides in the lotus clusters of Manasa Sarovara lake, Indra's sins could not affect him. Indra was ultimately relieved of all the reactions to his sinful deeds by strictly worshipping Lord Vishnu. Then he was called back to the heavenly planets by the Brahmanas and reinstated in his position. Text 18. O king, when Lord Indra reached the heavenly planets, the saintly Brahmanas approached him and properly initiated him into a horse sacrifice, Ashwamedha Yagya, meant to please the Supreme Lord. 19 and 20. The horse sacrifice performed by the saintly Brahmanas relieved Indra of the reactions to all his sins because he worshipped the Supreme Personality of Godhead in that sacrifice. Gravely sinful act, it was nullified at once by that sacrifice, just as fog is vanquished by the brilliant sunshine. 21. King Indra was favored by Marichi.
Sunrise.
Did I say sunrise? Oh, by the brilliant sunrise. O king, although he had committed a gravely sinful act, it was nullified at once by that sacrifice, just as fog is vanquished by the brilliant sunrise. Just 21. King Indra was favored by Marichi and the other great sages. They performed the sacrifice just according to the rules and regulations, worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supersoul, the original person. Thus Indra regained his exalted position and was again honored by everyone. Text 22 to 23. In this very great narrative, there is glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana. There are statements about the exaltedness of devotional service. There are descriptions of devotees like Indra and Vritrasura, and there are statements about King Indra's release from sinful life and about his victory in fighting the demons. By understanding this incident, one is relieved of all sinful reactions. Therefore, the learned are always advised to read this narration. If one does so, one will become expert in the activities of the senses, his opulence will increase, and his reputation will become widespread. One will also be relieved of all sinful reactions. He will conquer all his enemies, and the duration of his life will increase. Because this narration is auspicious in all respects, learned scholars regularly hear and repeat it on every festival day. Thus, and the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 6th canto, 13th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled King Indra Afflicted by Sinful Reaction.
Continuing with chapter number 14, entitled King Chitraketu's Lamentation. Text 1. King Pariksit inquired from Shukadeva Goswami, O learned Brahmana, demons are generally sinful, being obsessed with the modes of passion and ignorance. How then could Vritrasura have attained such exalted love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan? Purport: in this material world, everyone is obsessed with the modes of passion and ignorance. However, unless one conquers these modes and comes to the platform of goodness, there is no chance of one's becoming a pure devotee. This is confirmed by Lord Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita 7.28. Yisham tontakatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva mohanir mukta bhajante mam dhridavrata. Persons who have acted piously in previous lives and in this life, whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, and who are freed from the duality of delusion, engage themselves in my service with determination. Since Vritrasura was among the demons, Maharaj Pariksit wondered how it was possible for him to have become such an exalted devotee. 2. Demigods situated in the mode of goodness and great saints, cleansed of the dirt of material enjoyment, hardly ever render pure devotional service at the lotus feet of Mukunda. Therefore, how could Vritrasura have become such a great devotee? In this material world, there are as many living entities as atoms. Among these living entities, a very few are human beings, and among them, few are interested in following the regulative principles, religious principles. O best of the Brahmanas, Shukadeva Goswami, out of many persons who follow religious principles, only a few desire liberation from the material world. Among many thousands who desire liberation, one may actually achieve liberation, giving up material attachment to society, friendship, love, country, home, wife, and children. And among many thousands of such liberated persons, one who can understand the true meaning of liberation is very rare. Purport: there are 4 classes of men, namely karmis, jnanis, yogis, and bhaktas. This statement pertains especially to karmis and jnanis. A karmi tries to be happy within this material world by changing from one body to another. His objective is bodily comfort, either in this planet or in another. When such a person becomes a jnani, however, he aspires for liberation from material bondage. Among many such persons who aspire for liberation, one may actually be liberated during his life. Such a person gives up his attachment for society, friendship, love, country, family, wife, and children. Among many such persons who are in the vanaprastha stage, one may understand the value of becoming a sannyasi, completely accepting the renounced order of life. 5. Muktanam api siddhanam narayana parayanaha sudurlabha prashantatma kotushapi mahamune. Water. O great sage, among many millions who are liberated and perfect in knowledge of liberation, one may be a devotee of Lord Narayan or Krishna. Such devotees who are fully peaceful are extremely rare. Purport: Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the following purport to this verse. Simply desiring mukti or liberation is insufficient. One must become factually liberated. When one understands the futility of the materialistic way of life, one becomes advanced in knowledge, and therefore he situates himself in the vanaprastha order, unattached to family, wife, and children. One should then further progress to the platform of sannyas, the actual renounced order, never to fall again and be afflicted by materialistic life. Even though one desires to be liberated, this does not mean he is liberated. Only rarely is someone liberated. Indeed, although many men take sannyas to become liberated, because of their imperfections, they again become attached to women, material activities, social welfare, work, and so on. Jnanis, yogis, and karmis, devoid of devotional service, are called offenders. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Maya vadi Krishne aparati. One who thinks that everything is Maya, instead of thinking that everything is Krishna, is called aparadhi, or offender. Although the Mayavadis, impersonalists, are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, they may nonetheless be counted among the siddhas, those who have realized the self. They may be considered nearer to spiritual perfection because at least they have realized what spiritual life is. If such a person becomes Narayana Parayana, a devotee of Lord Narayana, he is better than a Jivan Mukta, who is liberated or perfect. This requires higher intelligence. There are two kinds of jnanis. One is inclined to devotional service and the other to impersonal realization. Impersonalists generally undergo great endeavor for no tangible benefit, and therefore it is said that they are husking paddy that has no grain. Stula tushavaгаtina. The other class of jnanis, whose jnana is mixed with bhakti, are also of two kinds. Those who are devoted to the so-called false form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and those who understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Sakchit Ananda Vigraha, the actual spiritual form. The Mayavadi devotees worship Narayana or Vishnu with the idea that Vishnu has accepted a form of Maya, and that the ultimate truth is actually impersonal. The pure devotee, however, never thinks that Vishnu has accepted a body of Maya. Instead, he knows perfectly well that the original absolute truth is the Supreme Person. Such a devotee is actually situated in knowledge. He never merges in the Brahman effulgence, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.2.32, Yene ravindakshava muktamaninas toyasta bhavada vashuddha buddhaya arya krishnena paramparam tata patantyato nadrita yushmadangraya. O Lord, the intelligence of those who think themselves liberated, but who have no devotion, is impure. Even though they rise to the highest point of liberation by dint of severe penances and austerities, they are sure to fall down again into material existence. For they do not take shelter at your lotus feet. Evidence of this same point is also given in Bhagavad Gita 9.11, wherein the Lord says, Avajananti ma mudha manushintanumashritam parambhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. When rascals that Krishna acts exactly like a human being, they deride the transcendental form of the Lord because they do not know the param bhavam, his transcendental form and activities. Such persons are further described in Bhagavad Gita 9.12 as follows: Moghasha mughakarmano mughajnana vichetasaha rakshasima surim chaiva prakritim mohinim shritaha. Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. Such persons do not know that Krishna's body is not material. There is no distinction between Krishna's body and his soul. But because less intelligent men see Krishna as a human being, they deride him. They cannot imagine how a person like Krishna could be the origin of everything. Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Such persons are described as moghasha, baffled in their hopes. Whatever they desire for the future will be baffled. Even if they apparently engage in devotional service, they are described as moghasha because they ultimately desire to merge into the Brahman effulgence. Those who aspire to be elevated to the heavenly planets by devotional service will also be frustrated, because this is not the result of devotional service. However, they are also given a chance to engage in devotional service and be purified. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtanaha Trityantaksto Bhadrani Fitunoti Suritsatam. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee, who relishes his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Unless the dirt within the core of one's heart is cleansed away, one cannot become a pure devotee. Therefore the word sudurlabha, very rarely found, is used in this verse. Not only among hundreds and thousands, but among millions of perfectly liberated souls, a pure devotee is hardly ever found. Therefore the words Kotishvapi are used herein. Srila Madhvacharya gives the following quotations from the Tantra Bhagavat, my personal favorite verse in the Prabhupada's purports. Nava kotyas tu devanam rishaya saptakotaya narayana sarve ye kechit tatparayana. There are 90 million demigods and 70 million sages who are all called Narayanayana, devotees of Lord Narayan. Among them, only a few are called Narayana Parayana. Narayanayana. Because there's 90 million demigods and 70 million sages. I mean, I just imagine them. 90 million demigods, 70 million sages? That's kind of amazing. That's quite an inventory. Narayanayana. There's Narayanayanas and there's Narayana Parayanas. What? As the saying goes. I think we could make a poem or something out of this. Or the beginning to a song. You can make us a rap. Gore can do it. Gore can do it.
We got to get Gore Karuni into it. He can do it. He could do it.
What?
Narayanayana Deva Rishadyas Tatparayanaha Ramadya Kechanaiva Syu Siddha Yoga. The difference between the Siddhas and the Narayana Parayanas is that direct devotees are called Narayana Parayanas, whereas those who perform various types of mystic yoga are called Siddhas. Text 6. Vritrasura was situated, Alice, one of these days, Alice. To the moon, Alice. One of these days. One of these days. Vritrasura was situated in a blazing fire of battle and was infamous. And was an infamous, sinful demon, always engaged in giving troubles and anxieties to others. How could such a demon become so greatly Krishna conscious? It was right on the spot. Exactly his question.
What was his question? I've heard
This is what Radhika Nagar was asking. Previously, the great sage Radhika Nagar Prabhu had asked a similar question. How is it that Vritrasura, who caused so much trouble to others, could be so greatly Krishna conscious?
Now we'll hear the answer again, just so that all of us can become clear on this point. Vritrasura was situated in the blazing fire of battle and was an infamous, sinful demon, always engaged in giving troubles and anxieties to others. How could such a demon become so greatly Krishna conscious? Purport. It has been described that in Narayana Parayana, a pure devotee is rarely found even among millions and millions of persons. Therefore, Pariksit Maharaj was surprised that Vritrasura, whose purpose was to give trouble and anxiety to others, was one of these devotees, even on a battlefield. What was the reason for Vitrasura's advancement? Text 7. My dear Lord, Shukadeva Goswami, although Vitrasura was a sinful demon, he showed the prowess of a most exalted Kshatriya and satisfied Lord Indra in battle. How could such a demon be a great devotee of Lord Krishna? These contradictions have caused me great doubt, and they have made me eager to hear of this from you. Text 8. Sri Sutta Goswami said, after hearing Maharaj Parikshit's very intelligent question, Shukadeva Goswami, the most powerful sage, began answering his disciple with great affection. Text 9. Shukadeva Goswami said, O king, I shall speak to you the same history I have heard from the mouths of Vyasadeva, Narada, and Devala. Please listen with attention. Text 10. O King Pariksit, in the province of Shurasena, there was a king named Chitraketu, who ruled the entire earth. During his reign, the earth produced all the necessities for life. Purport. Here the most significant statement is that the earth completely produced all the necessities of life during the time of King Chitraketu. As stated in the Ishopanishad, Isho Mantra 1, Ishavasyamidam sarvam yat tena chakchena bunjita makrita kasisvitnanam. Everything animate or inanimate, everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Krishna, the Supreme Controller, has created the material world, which is completely perfect and free from scarcity. The Lord supplies the necessities of all living entities. These necessities come from the earth, and thus the earth is the source of supply. When there is a good ruler, that source produces the necessities of life abundantly. However, when there is not such a good ruler, there will be scarcity. This is the significance of the word kamaduk. Elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam 110.4 it is said, Kamam vibarshiparjanya sarvakama dughamahi. During the reign of Maharaj Yudhishthira, the clouds showered all the water that people needed, and the earth produced all the necessities of men in profusion. We have experienced that in some seasons the rains produce abundance, and in other seasons there is scarcity. We have no control over the earth's productiveness, for it is naturally under the full control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By his order, the Lord can make the earth produce sufficiently or insufficiently. If a pious king rules the earth according to the Shastric injunctions, there will naturally be regular rainfall and sufficient produce to provide for all men. There will be no question of exploitation, for every black marketeering and other corrupt dealings will then automatically stop. Simply ruling the land cannot solve man's problems unless the leader has spiritual capabilities. He must be like Maharaj Yudhishthira, Pariksit Maharaj, or Ramachandra. Then all the inhabitants of the land will be extremely happy.
Text 11. This Chitraketu had 10 million wives, but although he was capable of producing children, he did not receive a child from any of them. By chance, all the wives were barren. Chitraketu, the husband of these millions of wives, was endowed with a beautiful form, magnanimity, and youth. He was born in a high family, he had a complete education, and he was wealthy and opulent. Nevertheless, in spite of being endowed with all these assets, he was full of anxiety because he did not have a son. Purport: it appears that the king first married one wife, but she could not bear a child. Then he married a second, a third, a fourth, and so on, but none of the wives could bear children. In spite of the material assets of Janmaishvarya, he was very much aggrieved because, in spite of having so many wives, he had no son. Certainly his grief was natural. Grihastha life does not mean having a wife and no children. Chanakya Pandit says, Putrahinam griham shunyam. If a family man has no son, his home is no better than a desert. The king was certainly most unhappy that he could not get a son, and this is why he had married so many times. Kshatriyas especially are allowed to marry more than one wife, and this king did so. Nonetheless, he had no issue. His queens all had beautiful faces and attractive eyes, yet neither his opulences, his hundreds and thousands of queens, nor the lands of which he was the supreme proprietor were sources of happiness for him. Once upon a time, when the powerful sage named Angira was traveling all over the universe without engagement, by his sweet will he came to the palace of King Chitraketu. Chitraketu immediately stood up from his throne and offered him worship. He offered drinking water and edibles, and in this way performed his duty as a host to a great guest. When the rishi was seated very comfortably, the king, restraining his mind and senses, sat on the ground at the side of the rishi's feet.
16. O King Pariksit, when Chitraketu, bent low in humility, was seated at the lotus feet of the great sage, the sage congratulated him for his humility and hospitality. The sage addressed him in the following words. The great sage Angira said, "My dear king, I hope that your body and mind and your royal associates and paraphernalia are well. When the 7 properties of material nature, the total material energy, the ego, and the 5 objects, proper order, the living entity within the elements is happy. Without these 7 elements, one cannot exist. Similarly, always protected by 7 elements: his instructor, Swami or Guru, his fort, his treasury, his royal order, and his friends." Wow. Purport: as is quoted by Sridhar Swami in his Bhagavatam commentary, Samyamat yau janapada durgadravina sanchayaha dandomitram chatyasaitak kritayo mataha. A king is not alone. He first has his spiritual master, the supreme guide, then come his minister, his fortifications, his treasury, his system of law and order, and his friends or allies. If these 7, the king is happy. Similarly, explained in Bhagavad Gita, Dehinosmin yata dehe. Soul is within the material ego and pancha tanmatra. When these 7 are in proper order, the living entity is in a mood of pleasure. Generally, when the associates, the king can be happy. Therefore, the great sage inquired about the king's personal health and the good fortune of his 7 associates. When we inquire from a friend whether everything is well, we are concerned not only with his personal self, but also with his family, his source of income, and his assistants or servants. All of them must be well, and then a person can be happy. Text 18. O King, O Lord of humanity, when a king directly depends upon his associates and followers, their instruction and followers. O King, O Lord of humanity, when a king directly depends upon his associates and follows their instructions, he is happy. Similarly, when his associates offer their gifts and activities to the king and follow his orders, they are also happy. Purport. The actual happiness of a king and his dependents is described in this verse. A king should not simply give orders to his dependents because he is supreme. Sometimes he must follow their instructions. Similarly, the dependents should depend on the king. This mutual dependence will make everyone happy. Text 19. O king, are your wives, citizens, secretaries, and servants, and the merchants who sell spices and oil under your control? Are you also in full control of your ministers, governors, your sons, and your other dependents? Purport. The masters or king and his subordinates should be interdependent. Through cooperation, both of them can be happy. Text 20. If the king's mind is fully controlled, all his family members and governmental officers are subordinate to him. His provincial governors present taxes on time, without resistance, and what to speak of lesser servants? Purport. Angira Rishi asked the king whether his mind was also under control. This is most essential for happiness.
Please expound upon that. Why is it a nice point?
Well, just appreciating that, these family members and government officers and others, that they'll follow somebody whose mind is controlled. When the implication being that they won't follow, they won't be subordinate to somebody whose mind is not controlled. So, although it's so subtle and it's actually like not really visible on the gross level, the situation of somebody and with respect to their mind actually dictates how anyone or everyone will or won't follow them. It's just a really valuable principle of leadership.
In my mind, Muchukunda, in his speech to Krishna, when he asked him who he was, and he explained how he was such a great warrior that he had such a huge, army and
Since the face is the index
who is needed to offer by the great sage Angira to the first and most perfect among Chitraketu's millions of queens, whose name was Kritadyuti. Text 29. Thereafter the great sage told the king, O great king, now you will have a son who will be the cause of both jubilation and lamentation. The sage then left without waiting for Chitraketu's response. Purport. The word harsha means jubilation, and shoka means lamentation. The king was overwhelmed with joy when he understood that he would have a son. Because of his great jubilation, he could not actually understand the statement of the sage Angira. He accepted it to mean that there would certainly be jubilation because of the birth of his future son, but that he would be the king's only son, and being very proud of his great wealth and empire, would not be very obedient to his father. Thus the king was satisfied, thinking, let there be a son. It does not matter if he is not very obedient. In Bengal there is a proverb that instead of having no maternal uncle, it is better to have a maternal uncle who is blind. The king accepted this philosophy, thinking that a disobedient son would be better than no son at all. The great sage Chanakya Pandit says, Korta putrena yatena yona vidvana dharmika kanina chakshusha kimva chakshu pi daiva kevalam. What is the use of a son who is neither a learned scholar nor a devotee? Such a son is like a blind, diseased eye, which always causes suffering. Nevertheless, the material world is so polluted that one wants to have a son, even though he is useless. This attitude is represented in the history of King Chitraketu. Text 30. As Kritika Devi, after receiving the semen of Lord Shiva from Agni, conceived a child named Skanda Kartikeya, Kritadyuti, having received semen from Chitraketu, became pregnant after eating remnants of food from the yajna performed by Angira.
31. After receiving semen from Maharaj Chitraketu, the king of Shurasena, Queen Kritadyuti gradually developed in her pregnancy. O King Pariksit, just as the moon develops during the bright fortnight. Thereafter, in due course of time, a son was born to the king. Hearing news of this, all the inhabitants of the state of Shurasena were extremely pleased. King Chitraketu was especially pleased. After purifying himself by bathing and by decorating himself with ornaments, he engaged learned brahmanas in offering benedictions to the child and performing the birth ceremony. Unto the brahmanas who took part in the ritualistic ceremony, the king gave charity of gold, silver, garments, ornaments, villages, horses, and elephants, as well as 60 crores of cows, 600 million cows. As a cloud indiscriminately pours water on the earth, the beneficent King Chitraketu, to increase the reputation, opulence, and longevity of his son, distributed like rainfall all desirable things to everyone.
When a poor man gets some money after great difficulty, his affection for the money increases daily. Similarly, when King Chitraketu, after great difficulty, received a son, his affection for the son increased day after day. The mother's attraction and attention to the son, like that of the child's father, excessively increased. The other wives, seeing Kritayuti's son, were very much agitated, as if by high fevers, with the desire to have sons. 38. As King Chitraketu fostered his son very carefully, his affection for Queen Kritayuti increased, but gradually he lost affection for the other wives who had no sons. 39. The other queens were extremely unhappy due to their being sonless. Because of the king's negligence toward them, they condemned themselves in envy and lamented. A wife who has no sons is neglected at home by her husband and dishonored by her co-wives, exactly like a maidservant. Certainly, such a woman is condemned in every respect because of her sinful life. Purport. As stated by Chanakya Pandit, Matayasya grahe nasti marya cha priyavadini aranyam tena gantavyam yataranyam tatagriham. A person who has no mother at home and whose wife does not speak sweetly should go to the forest. For such a person, living at home and living in the forest are equal. Similarly, for a woman who has no son, who is not cared for by her husband, and whose co-wives neglect her, treating her like a maidservant, to go to the forest is better than to remain at home.
41. Even maidservants who are constantly engaged in rendering service to the husband are honored by the husband, and thus they have nothing for which to lament. Our position, however, is that we are maidservants of the maidservant. Therefore, we are most unfortunate. Sri Shukadeva Goswami continued, being neglected by their husband and seeing Kritayuti's opulence in possessing a son, Kritayuti's co-wives always burned in envy, which became extremely strong. As their envy increased, they lost their intelligence, being extremely hard-hearted and unable to tolerate the king's neglect. They finally administered poison to the son. Unaware of the poison administered by her co-wives, Queen Kritayuti walked within the house, thinking that her son was sleeping deeply. She did not understand that he was dead. Thinking that her child had been sleeping for a long time, Queen Kritayuti, who was certainly very intelligent, ordered the nurse, "My dear friend, please bring my son here."
46. When the maidservant approached the child, who was lying down, she saw that his eyes were turned upward. There were no signs of life, all his senses having stopped, and she could understand that the child was dead. Seeing this, she immediately cried, "Now I am doomed," and fell to the ground. In great agitation, the maidservant struck her breast with both hands and cried loudly in regretful words. Hearing her loud voice, the queen immediately came, and when she approached her son, she saw that he was suddenly dead. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground, unconscious. O King Pariksit, hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace came, both men and women. Being equally aggrieved, they also began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried pretentiously, knowing full well their offense. 1551. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death, unknown causes, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamp blazing fire, and as he went to see the dead child, he kept slipping and falling on the ground. Surrounded unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress. Breathing heavily, regained consciousness. Speak.
When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu, dead child, who was the only son in the garland of flowers decorating the queen's head fell, and her hair scattered. Falling tears melted the coryllium eyes and moistened her breasts, which were covered with kumkum powder. As she lamented the loss of loud crying resembled the sweet sound of a Karari bird. Alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation, for during the life of a father you have caused the death of his son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws. If you are determined to contradict these laws, you are certainly the enemy of living entities and are never merciful. Purport: this is the way a conditioned soul condemns the Supreme Creator when he meets reverses. Sometimes he accuses the Supreme Personality of Godhead of being crooked, and some are not. Here the Queen blames Supreme Providence for her son's death. Following the creative laws, a father should die first and then his son. If the creative laws are changed according to the whims of Providence, then Providence certainly should not be considered merciful, but must be considered inimical to the created being. Experienced. He does not know how the subtle laws of fruitive activity work. And without knowledge of these laws of nature, he ignorantly criticizes the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 55. My Lord, you may say that there is no law that a father must die in the lifetime of his son, and that a son must be born in the lifetime of his father, since everyone lives and dies according to his own fruit of activity. However, if fruit of activity is so strong that birth and death depend upon it, there is no need of a controller or God. Again, if you say that a controller is needed because the material energy does not have the power to act, one may answer that if the bonds of affection you have created are disturbed by fruit of action, no one will raise children with affection. Instead, everyone will cruelly neglect his children. Since you have cut the bonds of affection that compel a parent to raise his child, you appear inexperienced and unintelligent. Purport: as stated in the Brahma Samhita, karmani nirodhati kintu cha bhakti bhajam. One who is taken to Krishna consciousness, devotional service, is not affected by the results of karma. In this verse, karma has been stressed as the basis of karma mimamsa philosophy, which says that one must act according to his karma, and that a supreme controller must give the results of karma. The subtle laws of karma, which are controlled by the Supreme, cannot be understood by ordinary conditioned souls. Therefore, Krishna says that one who can understand him and how he is acting, controlling everything by subtle laws, immediately becomes freed by his grace. That is the statement of Brahma Samhita. Karmani nirodhati kintu cha bhakti bhajam. One should take to devotional service without reservations and surrender everything to the supreme will of the Lord. That will make one happy in this life and the next.
56. My dear son, I am helpless and very much aggrieved. You should not give up my company. Just look at your lamenting father. We are helpless because without a son, we shall have to suffer the distress of going to the darkest, hellish regions. You are the only hope by which we can get out of these dark regions. Therefore, I request you not to go any further with the merciless Yama. Purport: according to the Vedic injunctions, one must accept a wife just to beget a son who can deliver one from the clutches of Yamaraj. Unless one has a son to offer oblations to the Pitas or forefathers, one must suffer in Yamaraja's kingdom. King Chitraketu was very much aggrieved, thinking that because his son was going away with Yamaraj, he himself would again suffer. The subtle laws exist for the karmis. If one becomes a devotee, he has no more obligations to the laws of karma. "57. My dear son, you have slept a long time. Now please get up. Your playmates are calling for you to play. Since you must be very hungry, please get up and suck my breast and dissipate our lamentation. My dear son, I am certainly most unfortunate, for I can no longer see your mild smiling. You have closed your eyes forever. I therefore conclude that you have been taken from this planet to another from which you will not return. My dear son, I can no longer hear your pleasing voice." 59. Sri Shukadeva Goswami continued, accompanied by his wife, who was thus lamenting for her dead son. King Chitraketu began crying loudly, with an open mouth, being greatly aggrieved. Text 60. As the king and queen lamented, all their male and female followers joined them in crying. Because of the sudden accident, all the citizens of the kingdom were almost unconscious. I know. When the great sage Angira understood that the king was almost dead in an ocean of lamentation, he went there with Narada Rishi. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 6th canto, 14th chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Kinchitketu's Lamentation.
Thus ends today's reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll take it up again tomorrow at 10:45 a.m. India Standard Time. We'll see you all back here. And yes?
Tomorrow is also Ekadasi, so no breakfast, lunch will be till noon. So maybe the readings will be slightly adjusted because the lunch is at noon, 12. And in the morning is Abhishek, 9:30, just opposite the gate when you get out at Govardhan.